Hello, Garland Nixon here with Ray Mcgovern. He's a former CIA analyst and he is the co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We're going to talk about potential pardons. We're going to talk about Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, all kinds of stuff. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and Ray Mcgovern is a former CIA analyst, and boy, he really knows his stuff, particularly when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to, and also, might I add, he was an expert in Russian and Chinese relations, Soviet-Sino relations at the time, speaks fluent Russian and German, and I'm still working on English. So, Ray, thanks for coming on, and I think we got some real important stuff to talk about.
Thanks, Garland. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with this. Let's start with one of the particular nominees because it's in your wheelhouse, Tulsi Gabbard. As you probably know, after 2016, I was a big Tulsi Gabbard fan. In fact, here's an interesting story. At the time, I was on Radio Sputnik, and Tulsi Gabbard announced that she was going to run 2019, somewhere around that. She says, I'm going to run for president. And I said on the air, I said, oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to take off and I'm going to go to Hawaii and I'm going to be at her announcement for president. Because I was a big fan, because anti-war. And I thought, okay, at the time, she was a big anti-war voice. The next day, people call me, hey, did you see your face in the news? No. NBC News did a story and it said, the Russians have found their candidate, and it had my picture. Picture of the article. I'm like, geez, I didn't know it was Russian. But that being said, so she's back in the news. Donald Trump has said, hey, Tulsi Gabbard, a person who introduced a bill once called the Stop Arming Terrorists Act in Syria. But at any rate, so Tulsi Gabbard, there's attacks on her. Your thoughts on her, and also at some point, if you could tell us if a person like Tulsi were to become the director of national intelligence, what it would mean. Tulsi Gabbard, that's the name, that's the pick, and the neocons are going crazy. Ray Mcgovern, your thoughts?
Well, it is the fact that the neocons, and not only the neocons, but the security state, what some people call the deep state, those players are going crazy. Now, what about Tulsi? Well, I know Tulsi. I briefed her at her invitation back when she was a congressperson. What did I know? I noted that she was really interested. She wanted to hear the real deal. She was familiar with Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We kept feeding her briefing documents and the kinds of memos that we were then sending to the president so that she could be fully informed on these things. In other words, she was curious, she was bright as hell, she asked the right questions. We had great hopes for her. When she decided to run for president, I too felt elated that she might even be able to prevail. Of course, she was shut down right away by Hillary Clinton as a Russian agent, for God's sake. An agent of Putin. And that's when you have the establishment of the Democratic Party coming at you like that, well, you have zero or minus zero chance. What about recently? Well, I was surprised, to use a mild word, when Trump nominated her to be the head of all the intelligence agencies. There are 18 of them now. They grew like Topsy. There were 12 back in my day. What else? Well, there's a new structure. In our day, the legislation creating the CIA made the director not only head of the agency, but head of the entire intelligence community. In other words, he had authority over all other 11 agencies of my day. Now it would be all 18. Now, that was a casualty of 9/11. In a word, and I can prove this, the Congress needed to do something. But one of the 9/11 panelists, commission members, his name was Horton he was a senator from Washington State, Slade Horton. Well, let me just say that after the commission report was published, I had been asked by BBC to give my reflections on that. So had Slade Gordon. So we found ourselves in the same blue room in Washington. And I said to Slade Gordon, I said, Senator Gordon, you know as well as I do that it's a myth that no one had the authority to bang heads together and get the intelligence community working together. It can be done. I've seen it done under Admiral Turner. Why is it that you perpetuate this myth and you need to create another superstructure on top of all this and give a new national intelligence director the authority that George Tenet already had but did not exercise? What do you do that for? And he says, Ray, you're telling me the lights are on here. Of course I know that. But we had to do something. I mean, we had to have some kind of bureaucratic rejiggering here. So we decided, well, we'll create this superstructure and we'll make whoever's the director of national intelligence, give them the authority. Okay. That's how it came about. So now, gradually, starting out with about 100 members, it's in the thousands. Okay. So it's a separate sort of agency, and it does have entree to the president. The head of national intelligence is responsible for the President's Daily Brief. That is the acme of intelligence analysis, of intelligence briefing capability of the President. And Avril Haines, the President, the Director of National Intelligence, is in charge of that. So who's she? Well, she's a political person who has no intelligence or historical or any other kind of back. She's a real good politician. And when CIA officials need to be pardoned or overlooked when they raid the Senate Intelligence Committee computers, she's just a lawyer to get them off with not even a slap on the wrist, sort of like a slap. I'm not done looking. So she's nothing, okay? Now, what would Tulsi do? My God, she's something. I have to tell you, she's something. She really is a bright person, okay? So what would she do? Well, she would find out who to listen to and who not to listen to. She would find out who told Bill Burns, the head of CIA now, to tell President Biden, nominal president now, that Putin had already lost in Ukraine, that his army had been discredited for the whole world to see. When did that happen? Early July of last year, 2023. Turned out not to be the case. When Avril Haines was asked, did the Ukrainians have a good chance to win? December 2022, she said, well, the Russians are running out of ammunition. The Russians have no indigenous capability to make the weapons that they're losing hither and yon on the battlefield. And it looks really good for sure, yes. Now, my God, that's the kind of politicized intelligence that no president needs. So what will Avril Haines do if she's given her head? And that, of course, all depends on whether President Trump says, okay, Tulsi Gabbard is the one that I will listen to, cooperate with her when she gives you requests or requirements. So, well, she's likely to say, look, Mr. President, you know that Mr. Biden was misled, or maybe they were just trying to tell him what he wanted to hear, but Ukraine is a loss. We've got to make the best deal that we can. The terms are stringent, but there is flexibility there. You're a deal maker. This is where you can intervene. Now, one of the things that your people have said, for instance, General Kellogg, who is your special emissary on Ukraine and Russia, one of the things they've said is maybe a requirement that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO for 10 years. Well, of course, the Russians want Ukraine never to join NATO. But would they settle for 20 years or 50 years? In other words, you're a deal maker. I think you can deal because the Russians are in control, but they don't want to take over all of Ukraine. They don't want to take over Poland and Baltics. Your predecessor was grossly misled if he really believed all that stuff, okay? So deal. That's what I would say on Ukraine. In other words, that's what Tulsi Gabbard would say on Ukraine. Would she get away with it? It all depends. All depends on whether Trump supported her. What was happening recently, I should be used to it by now, but I hate slander and I hate people spoiling other people's reputation. There's one professor at Yale's really good at that. His name is Professor Timothy Snyder. He's been wrong on many things. He's an aficionado of Ukraine, and he's been not 100% wrong. He's been 125% wrong on Ukraine all along, and he persists in his misleading the American public and all those young students that think they're getting the right scoop from a historian at Yale. Now, he wrote this terrible thing. I have it here. The knives are out for Tulsi Gabbard. Well, Timothy Snyder writes this thing in his Substack, Tulsi Gabbard holds the knife. It's sort of a mirror image here. His whole piece says that she holds the knife to American security, and if she gets nominated, here's all the things she's a captive of the terrorists, of Putin, of all these people. It's just so bad that immediately I wrote a little X, okay? And I said, look, Snyder, I challenge you to a debate on Tulsi Gabbard, okay? Last time you and I debated was on Ukraine. It was exactly 10 years ago on Amy Goodman, okay? I remember saying to you, what about the intercepted conversation which showed that the United States, in the person of Victoria Nuland and our ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt at the time, had orchestrated this whole coup, and that was on YouTube 2.5 weeks before the coup happened. What about that, Professor Snyder? And he says, is that all you got? I said, whoa, don't you think that was a coup? He said, what coup? So anyhow, I was not used to this kind of debate. I could have done better, I suppose, and just kind of Amy stopped us there. So what I'm suggesting is that we do that again. So I wrote to Timothy Snyder and I wrote to Amy's people, but I got a response from neither, which is not surprising. Ever since I started telling the truth about Russia-gate, I've been pretty much banned from Amy Goodman, as well as Common Dreams and lots of other places where I used to be published automatically. So it's going to take a while, I guess, for me to rehabilitate myself for having been right about it. Okay, so that's Tulsi Gabbard. Now, one sidelight here is that when they changed the legislation to install a national intelligence director, they gave that person all the authorities that the former director of Central Intelligence had under that community hat that he wore. They were all he's in those days, okay? So that means that Tulsi Gabbard would have the duty to oversee and to comment on covert action proposals. So if some of these terrific operatives say we're going to overthrow country X and we could do it, what do you think? Well, one of the people will be asked what she thinks. Tulsi Gabbard. Oh my God. And half of these things are very cockamamie. And it's hard for the National Intelligence Director to do this, but she would have the authority, and I think that she would have the guts to say, look, Mr. President, we know that you've been shown through covert action channels this plan. Throw it in the trash can, Mr. President, because if this happens, and these folks on the operations side never really think this through. If they do this, and even if they're successful, you know what's going to happen? X, Y, and Z, all really bad for us. So nix it. So, are they afraid of her? Of course they're afraid of her. I mean, most of the money goes to the agencies for covert action programs, about 90%. The analysts are sort of an afterthought, and some of the analysts, of course, have been corrupted. Witness the ones that told Bill Burns, yeah, but Putin already lost back in July of last year. So it's a long thing about the director of national intelligence, but the knives are out for her. People like Timothy Snyder, are really, really doing their best to blacken her, to slur her, And I don't know if she'll make it through to be nominated. That depends on how hard Trump wants to fight for her. So we'll have to see about that. The other guy, of course, you mentioned before, Kash Patel. If you're thinking about people being afraid of people in Washington, well, Tulsi Gabbard, I would put in AAA league. Major League World Series is Kash Patel. Why? He's been around. He's worked at the House Intelligence Committee. He's worked at the Justice Department. He's an investigator and he's a prosecutor. And he was real close with what was going on. And when he quit, or when Trump left, he started to spill some beans, but he was always really careful. He did a real long interview with Aaron Maté at the time. Always real careful to stop short of saying something classified that they could put him in jail for, okay? Whoa, what's he nominated for? FBI director, for God's sake. Now, as I say, he knows where the bodies are buried. He knows how this whole Russia-gate got started. I've written about this, but did not lately. There's one piece that I did for opednews.com back in the end of 2020, I believe it was, which goes through this chapter and verse as to how this all happened. So Kash knows this stuff. Now, as I reconstruct all this and why it's important, is because the whole Russia-gate, I mean, you can't minimize the impact of Russia-gate. 3 years ago, one of my Democratic friends who runs a website, a radio program, actually said, Mcgovern, why do you keep harping? You sound like a one-trick pony. You always do. I said, they're really simple. Russia has nuclear weapons. You get Americans thinking that Russia is evil incarnate, you could easily mobilize them to support a president who do something really stupid, get us all killed. Okay, that's why. Okay, and that's why it's important now. The whole thing was invented, and we know that now from forensic evidence and from other evidence. Would you like me to take you through that just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Let me just say this, that when it became known in June of 2016 that, it became known, actually it was announced by Julian Assange that he had emails relating to Hillary Clinton that were about to be produced. 12 June 2016. Whoa. The flag went up. What emails does he have? Oh my God. If he's got emails from Hillary's computer and the DNC computer, those emails will show how he tricked Bernie Sanders and his folks out of the nomination that year. Pure and simple. How the DNC slanted the field so far against Bernie, he didn't have a chance. He didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, as we say. Okay, so what we could do? Well, it's clear what happened. They had no answer to this. The Democratic National Committee convention was coming up at the end of July. 12 June, oh, what did they give about this? 6 weeks? We'll figure out something. And they couldn't figure out anything, so they had a little confab. And I wasn't a fly on the wall, but it's very clear from the other circumstantial evidence that Hillary had her council of war, and she said, what are we going to do about this? And Jake Sullivan, or maybe some other person, I think it was Jake, says, I got an idea. Let's blame the Russians for hacking the Democratic National Committee. That way we get a twofer. We hate the Russians and we hate whoever leaked the documents, and we'll divert attention from what's in the document. Nobody read what's in the document. Say, why did Russia do this? Why did Russia do this? Why did Russia? And Hillary looks around at the table and says, but it wasn't the Russians. Oh, doesn't matter, Hillary. Anybody got a better idea? All right, we'll go with it. That was just as the convention was beginning. Now, there's a woman named Jennifer, I'll think of her last name in a second. She was Hillary Clinton's PR person. She said, I was aghast at learning this. And it was really hard to believe. But I was asked to take my little golf cart around to all the outlets and channel people there at the convention and try to sell this story. And it was really hard because it's really hard to believe it. But then when we got back to Brooklyn, okay, Brooklyn was Hillary's campaign headquarters, right? We got to Brooklyn, and all kinds of people, intelligence people, and reporters in contact with intelligence people were telling, it was the Russians, it was the Russians. And then finally, on October 7th, the head of national intelligence, there you go, James Clapper, and the head of Homeland Security published a memorandum saying, aha, yes, it was the Russians. We have good evidence that it was the Russians. Okay, that's the 7th of October, so a month before the election. You with me? 2016. Okay, so did Clapper or Jay Johnson, who was head of Homeland Security, have good evidence of that? No. How do I know that? Because CrowdStrike, the sleuth, the cyber detective agency that was to look into the DNC computers and servers, didn't report anything. They couldn't find anything to report, okay? And Obama, and this is on the record, Obama said, go ahead anyway. It's only a month before the election. Go ahead, do this report, and we'll see what CrowdStrike will come up with later. CrowdStrike didn't report until a week later, okay? So October, November, you have this charade going on, and then, of course, the election doesn't come out very well. Who's responsible for electing Donald Trump? You got it, Garland. It was the Russians, okay? Now, whatever you think of Donald Trump, to accuse a foreign country of messing in your election, well, that's pretty bad. And the irony, of course, here is that it wasn't the Russian government messing around in our election with our security services. The only difference is they didn't win this time. Trump won. I mean, it couldn't have been that the Democratic candidate did campaign in the right places. It couldn't be anything like that. No, it's the Russians. So here's a little sidelight. And I know this is in the weeds, but it's really reflective of, and it's missed by people who don't know the procedures in the intelligence community. When it became known that Hillary had decided to blame the Russians big time, okay, that was leaked to David Sanger, who's the leak-e of a lot of what the CIA and everything. So he says he's got this report. Now, the same day, or about the same day, the Russian intelligence service got this same scoop. Is that a coup? I mean, it's available in Washington. Somebody's listening, okay? They reported it back. But what that happens, when the intelligence service puts out a report based on what the Russians are saying, then if you think it's an inside source or some sort of leak or something, you are required under federal law, you, the CIA, to file a crimes report, reporting to the FBI the information that the Russians are meddling in, and that Hillary is calling them on that. Okay, so why all this? Well, that required the two major authors of this whole charade, John Brennan of the CIA and the FBI director James Comey. It required Brennan under law to go down to Comey and say, I got to refile a crimes report here about what we're doing here, only because the Russians have a report. Here's the crimes report. It's in your lap now, Jim. And he smiled. Thank you very much, John. See you later. Okay. Now, this was important. Why? Because that's against the law. Okay. And when, what's his name? That senator from
Grassley?
Yeah, Grassley. He's the guy from Iowa who has forever been overseeing the justice and the intelligence and the FBI. Okay, overseeing it in this sense,
right?
Not overseeing, right? So he sums up the gumption when James Comey is a year or two out of office, and he says, "Now, Mr. Comey, that crimes report, I mean, that was a big deal. Now, do you remember about that crimes report?" And Comey, speaking from his living room, it was COVID time, and he says, "Well, doesn't ring a bell. Doesn't ring a bell." So Grassley goes on to the next question. Okay, doesn't ring a bell. Okay, now Grassley later, when one of these perpetrators of Russia-gate, Kleinsmith, he was the lawyer that worked in the FBI, and he falsified the records on very sensitive requests for electronic eavesdropping. When he was caught and tried, Grassley said that, well, this is an example of the Department of Just Us. JUST, new word, US. Because I'll bet, says Grassley, I'll bet that Kleinsmith doesn't spend a day in jail. Did Kleinsmith? No, he didn't spend the day in jail. So here's Grassley, the guy who's supposed to be overseeing all this stuff, the guy who Comey dissed by saying, beats the hell out of me, or what was it he said? Doesn't ring a bell. He's complaining to us in a email that he wrote himself. Oh, that's the Department of Just Us. That's what you got to expect. Well, these are little, and they're not vignettes. These are important sort of benchmarks here. And the thing is that Kash Patel knows all about this. The last thing I'll say, and this is sort of a live wire here, in the end, this firm of CrowdStrike did do an investigation, did do the forensics on the DNC computers and servers, okay? And they had their findings, okay? But nobody knew what their findings were. So finally, Adam Schiff chaired a meeting of the House Intelligence Committee that I think was forced, actually, by the Republicans, okay? And the testifier was Sean Henry, head of CrowdStrike, who was given this task to look into the DNC computers. Now, here's Sean Henry. What's his background? He worked for the FBI as their chief techie for Bob Mueller, and he was able to set up his own little CrowdStrike. So that's the background here. So Adam Schiff says, now, Mr. Henry, tell us how the Russians were able to infiltrate the DNC and get all those emails and stuff. And so you can see Sean Henry is, And then his lawyer grabs him and says, "You're under oath." Oh, well, actually, Mr. Schiff, there's no technical evidence that the Russians hacked into the DNC emails, and actually, there's no technical evidence that anybody, Russians or anybody, hacked into those emails. Now, there's some circumstantial evidence that bears the earmarks of the way the Russians usually operate, but we don't really have any technical evidence. Whoa. So what happened? That was the 5th of December, 2017. Adam Schiff took that transcript, put it at the bottom of his safe, and kept it secret for 2.5 years. Okay? What happens then? Well, Trump was in office, and he knows about this transcript. And this guy Ratcliffe and another new director of national intelligence comes in, and Trump says, I wish I could get that released, that testimony that shows there was no Russian hacking, Mike. And they said, well, Mr. President, with all due respect, you're president, so you could. How do I do that? Well, just ask me to call Schiff and tell him if he doesn't release him, I'll release him. I have that authority. I'd reference it to you. Okay, do it. So, on the 7th of May, 2020, right, 2.5 years after that testimony, the transcript of this House Intelligence Committee it was a closed thing, but it was not classified. Okay, it was released together with 50 or 5. It was number 38 in a stack of. So it was ignored. What was the date that I said? May 7th, 2020. What's today? Well, what is today? December or something, right? 2024. Okay. So if my arithmetic is right, that's well over 4 years that this stuff has been kept under wraps, plus 2.5 by Schiff. And Americans still don't know that there's no technical evidence that there was a hack into the DNC computers. Last thought. Okay. Most people, and I hasten to add that veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, we attracted some really good people when we set up shop right before the attack on Iraq and said this was a crock, okay? 2 of them were former technical directors at the National Security Agency, NSA, okay? When they joined our ranks, it was a terrific input. And when they looked at these charges about a Russian hack, they were immediately suspicious. And then they looked at what Ed Snowden released in 2013, and they put 2 and 2 together. And then they thought about the systems that they themselves had constructed at NSA and put them together, and they said, this is a crock. There's no evidence. As a matter of fact, we know that it was not a hack. When did they say that? December 12, 2016. Okay? 16, right? So, well before anybody else. Of course, we were ignored. They were ignored. But the final thing is, okay, if it wasn't a hack, and we said this in this memo, I mean, who could have, well, it wasn't a hack. That means that it didn't escape through electronic means, as I understand
Right.
it. Okay? So it had to be what? It had to be sort of like a thumb drive or some other external storage device. You plug it to your computer and you copy it. You don't hack it. There's no signature in the air, in the ether. Okay, and that's what happened. That's the only way it could have happened. And the Mueller report itself allowed for the possibility that happened. Okay, so now that means if you're a detective, you know more about this than I do, Garland. But if you're a detective, you got to say, well, okay, it wasn't a hack. Who had access to DNC computers? Well, there's only one candidate that we know of. His name is Seth Rich. Well, what happened to him? On the 10th of July, 2016, he was murdered. They said it was a robbery, but the robbers forgot to take any valuables from him, his wallet or his watch or anything. So he was murdered. And actually, Julian Assange, head of WikiLeaks, said things at the time that suggested in an oblique way that it could have been Seth Rich to leak these emails. Now, as you know, I publish a lot, especially on things that are very sensitive that other people shy away from. So what happens next? I get a subpoena. A subpoena from a judge that Aaron Rich and his family and the Democrats put up to subpoenaing me for all information having to do with whether it was a hack or whether it was a leak. The brazenness of this thing. And they quoted 3 VIPS memoranda saying, show us the evidence that you thought, show us everything. We want to go into your computer and give us everything. So, I sent back a kind of a rejoinder, and that wasn't sufficient. Not only me, but the 2 former technical directors at NSA were also subpoenaed. One other person was. So the gall of this thing, they just couldn't abide people trying to tell the truth. And at that time, of course, we did not have Sean Henry's testimony because it had not yet been released by Trump's new director of national intelligence. So what I'm saying here is that Kash Patel was involved in all this stuff. He wasn't involved in some of the skullduggery that went on, but he knows where the bodies are buried. And so they are really having their knives out for Kash Patel, because if he becomes FBI director, he has already threatened pretty extensively to work justice on what he saw happen. Not only that, for God's sake, he's written a book. I've ordered it now. It's hard to get a hold of. But it lists 60 miscreants, 60 people in high office, and a couple of them, I think, even in media, that are ready for justice to come down with a heavy hand on. So these people have been identified, many of them. They're scared to death, and in a jocular but not really funny way. I wrote an a couple of weeks ago that says, if I were a life insurance agent, I certainly wouldn't sell a new policy to Kash Patel. I say jocular but not funny. It's not really funny. And if he doesn't make it, remember where you heard that first.
Yeah, one of the things I found that I thought that was interesting was the FBI, as I understand it, either did not divulge or possibly even hid the fact that they had Seth Rich's laptop. And at some point in court, they were forced to admit it. And at that point, there were, and maybe still are, fighting to hide the contents of that laptop for like 60 years or something. Are you familiar with that, Ray?
I am, yeah. It's really an interesting thing. What happened was Hunter Biden forgot where he left his laptop for repair.
No, I was talking about Seth Rich's laptop.
Oh, Seth Rich's, yeah, okay. Well, yeah. We wondered at the time what happened to Seth Rich's personal laptop and his business laptop, so to speak, at the office. And we later learned that the FBI had it. They swooped down and grabbed it from the Metropolitan Police. Okay. That in itself is a story, and the Metropolitan Police is sort of kowtowed to the FBI, as every local enforcement unit has learned to do. Okay, there's never, in my experience, been a local law enforcement unit. No, this is our case, FBI. Take a powder. Never happens. Okay, so they took the laptop, and now they have the laptop, and there is still one court proceeding, which is asking them to divulge the parts of the laptop and other information that the FBI has on Seth Rich. And that's been going on for 4, 5, 6 years. And the FBI said first, no, we don't have anything. And then we found out, or the lawyers found out, that there was a special arrangement where they could say they didn't have anything, but they did have a special sort of thing set up. So, okay, we got it, but now that we have 100,000, we can't possibly process them. Okay, well, process them anyway, says the judge. Well, it's going to take 3 months or 5 months, and besides, there's COVID, and we're reduced, so do it anyway. Well, what's the latest? The FBI has lied first about having any data in their holdings on Seth Rich. Then they were forced to admit. Then they said, well, maybe several months. Now the judge has given them till February 7th. Okay, February 7th to respond to this case, which says we need to see the material in these laptops. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the FBI director, including Christopher Wray, who just said he's going to retire just in time, lied through their teeth about Seth Rich. Well, why would they lie through their teeth about Seth Rich? Well, I would suggest, and you're a detective, well, you think maybe they have something to hide there? And, what happened to Seth Rich? Well, it was really a very unusual robbery where they didn't take anything, and lots of people thought it really smelled very bad, including Julian Assange, who probably knows a lot more than we do about Seth Rich. So when his brother started suing us to cease and desist, saying that it wasn't a Russian hack, oh my God, I don't know how they persuaded the judge to go along with that subpoena. There were two. I had two. My technical experts, that is the previous NSA technical directors, they were served subpoenas for about 2 months before I was. And Garland, I was feeling a little, get this, I was feeling a little subpoena envy, Well, then they came down on me hard with 2 more. So, the whole thing stinks to high heaven. Whether Kash Patel would be able to clean this stable out, I don't know. But from what I've seen of him, he can be as mean as he looks, And, he doesn't seem to care very much looking mean. And again, just as with Tulsi Gabbard, it will all depend on Trump. And during his first term, Trump gave in. He didn't have really good people. He had no Kash Patel, that's for damn sure. He had James Comey instead, who was working against him at every turn. So whether Trump would support this kind of thing is different now. I think he might be tempted to. Whether in the end he's able to, the deep state is very, very powerful. I don't know if they'll let Tulsi, much less Kash, get nominated. They got lots of stuff on those senators that will have to approve the nomination or have to, confirm. So who knows what's going to happen? But the die is cast in a way that I've never seen it before. And Gabbard and Kash Patel are the main people here. There's lots else to talk about because, as I said at a recent X, if you're visualizing Joe Biden's list of people to pardon, scroll down to C for Clinton, first name Hillary, and don't think that she's not on there, because can't remember where you heard it first. I think she would be eager for a pardon because what she did is demonstrable and demonstrable to the new FBI director if Kash Patel makes it, and that would be a main reason why he might not make it.
Well, I've said I forgot what I was talking about something the other day, and I said, well, as an investigator, former investigator, with these types of things, you hand me one of these things. Hey, Garland, X happened. What would I do? And here's the problem they'll have. I'd have to trace it back. I'd say, okay, X happened. This laptop, there was a decision made that go to the FBI. At some point, there was a decision made that the FBI was going to say, we don't have Seth Rich's laptop, right? I'm doing an investigation. I want to follow the trail back and find out who made that decision. That tells me, right? As an investigator, I'm going to say, okay, who carried it out? Who said that to the judge? Who said that? Who filled out who said that? Joe Smith said it. I'm going to Joe Smith. Joe Smith, first of all, lock all of those emails. Joe, let me see all your emails. What decision day was it made? Blah, blah, blah. Let me see all the emails in and around that time. Let me see all the text messages. Joe Smith, who was it that said to you? Did you make that decision, Joe Smith, to say that we're going to say, no, we don't have it? No, I didn't. Who told you to make that decision? Garland Nixon. Then I'm going to Garland Nixon. I'm going to follow it backwards because somebody made the decision to say, we don't have the laptop. Somebody made the decision to say, we're going to open a case, you can call it Crossfire. Somebody made a decision to say, we've got 20,000 text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. What do you want to do with them? I say we erase them. So every one of those cases that you give me, I'm going to follow them backwards to get to the point, because everybody underneath of that can say, hey, my boss told me to do that. What am I going to get fired? And at some point, somebody said, let's do that. Let's do that. And I'm following that person. And now I'm going to look at everything and everybody they talk to. You see what I'm saying? So if Kash Patel gets in there and he already has a pretty good idea what went down, all he has to do is follow it backwards. And something tells me names like Ray and Comey and Sullivan and Blinken. Joe, did you know this? It's out everywhere right now. Joe Biden is pardoning like 1,000 people, and they're like former drug convicted people. How nice is that? People are in jail. You're getting people out of the prison. They've done their time. What a wonderful thing. Why do I get the feeling that in order to have a big chunk of people in the government, the Hillary Clintons, etc., that I'm going to pardon, I need some cover. And the cover I do is I pardon 1,000 people. Look at me, I'm a good guy. And that way, when I give a little group of 125 people, the Adam Schiffs, etc. of the world, and I pardon all of them, it doesn't look so big because I just pardoned 1,000. Come on, guys, I just pardoned 1,000 drug. And Trump is terrible. Why he'll go after Comey and Ray and blah, blah, blah. Who made the decision when it comes to Kleinsmith? Who handled that case and why? When Kleinsmith was caught lying in an investigation, how about this? And this is a big one, if you ask me. Your thoughts on the crimes surrounding the Steele dossier and what Kash Patel potentially can find there, right? Because that's a big one. What kind of an idiot looks and says, well, let's see, somebody wrote a document that said the Russians handled something out of a consulate in Miami, but the Russians don't have a consulate in Miami. Yeah, never mind. Let's keep going. I think this will be okay. Come on, Ray.
Well, that was a lot there, Garland. Let me start with where you started, and that is going back to the sources and getting to know who made which decisions. When you started talking, frankly, it hurt my head because I kept thinking, so who are you going to get to do that? Who are you going to get to do that? The Metropolitan Police? No, it has to be the FBI. Come on! But then you mentioned Kash Patel. Well, that's not the FBI. That's a new breath of fresh air if he makes it. Okay, so that changed my head doesn't hurt anymore. That would be possible. Would there be great resistance? Well, there are loyalties, there are misplaced loyalties, and there are people who are sort of involved who don't want to, get fired, and so there would be a hell of a lot of resistance. Similarly, with Tulsi Gabbard and the new CIA director, Ratcliffe. I mean, how do you cleanse out a whole analysis division that has been trained to think that Putin is the devil incarnate, and that every bad thing that happens in the world, the Russians are behind it? It takes a long time, and it would take a lot of guts and a lot of luck, frankly, and a lot of support from Trump. So those were my first thoughts. Now, I've forgotten the last part of what you said. They were equally interested. I would like to comment.
The Steele dossier.
I mean,
that's a big one. You're paying for you. Okay, you know that the Steele dossier is coming from it's a political document paid for by opposition research, and you take it and you find that you look at it, come on, and you realize it's a piece of crap, but that's all the only we got, so you're going to go for it. So you take opposition research, you hide that it's opposition research, you pay the guy for that. So you're paying for part of the opposition research. You know it's from everything says this is opposition research, and you hide that from everybody, and then and then move on it. It's the Steele dossier. How do professionals in the FBI make an argument that it was valid to utilize the Steele dossier as an intelligence, the foundation for such an important investigation, and then to lie about it in the FISA investigation? All of those people got to get pardons, don't they? All the ones who lied and signed off on the FISA investigation repeatedly.
Yeah, there's a short answer, Garland, and that is that their boss, James Comey, and his deputy, McCabe, let the word out that these were the orders, and an organization like the FBI is trained to do what it's ordered to do. And why did they think they could get away with it? That's the biggie, okay? Well, luckily, James Comey, smart as he is, or I say clever, is not real smart, because he wrote in his book 2 years after all this stuff. He said, we were making decisions, and this is a quote, in an environment in which Hillary Clinton was sure to be the next president of the United States, period. Oh, you're making decisions in that environment, okay? Well, you're going to get promoted. You're going to get lauded. You're going to get honored if she wins, and it's a sure thing. Now, what's going to happen to you if people find out, well, largely based on lies, or, just, no, come on, give me a break. Nobody's going to come after us for doing this. And then she didn't win, okay? So he betrayed the whole thing with that one sentence, in my view. We were operating in an environment where Hillary was sure to win, okay? And she lost. So what now? Well, luckily they got Joe Biden in there, okay? And that's what we're talking about. How many people will he pardon? And I have to say this about the people who fostered this myth about the Steele dossier and all that kind of stuff. There were lawyers, and I mean, I think Kash Patel is the kind of lawyer my dad was, okay? He loved the law, okay? He liked to enforce the law, and he had disdain for people who acted in the way many lawyers did. He used to call them fatheads. that's his better word, as my father would usually say. A bunch of fatheads. Okay, so Kash Patel knows about the fatheads. Here's one guy. His name is Sussman. Okay. Now, he denied that he's working for Hillary, and then he lied, and then some fancy judges let him off. I mean, it was very clear that he lied and represented himself as not representing the Hillary Clinton campaign. Perjury. Well, he got left off. He got let off. Now, how about the journalists? Well, there was two crackerjack investigative reporters. that wrote a book about about the Steele dossier and all the other things that Trump was guilty of. And their names were David Korn and Michael Isikoff. Very well renowned investigative reporters. The name of the book was Russian Roulette. Yeah, it was awful, They drank the Kool-Aid deliberately, for sure. Everybody just wanted to make sure Trump didn't win, okay. So these guys, in my view, are totally discredited. They've got sinecures galore, but that's because of the people they were loyal to in lying. But this is the kind of people that Kash Patel knew that they were lying. And when he says, media people won't be immune to this kind of thing, that sends shivers down my back at first. But then I think, if media people are deliberately lying, well, why not hold those people accountable as well, particularly when the stakes are so high that they involve the election of a president of the United States. So, yeah, there are lots of people.
Well, let me throw something else. Throw something else at you real quick, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, having studied the investigation of the Steele dossier very, very deeply. And one of the things I found out, you may be familiar with this. At some point, once they were pressed, it might have been during the Durham investigation, John Durham. The FBI was pressed about this Steele dossier. Did they vet it? Did they try to figure out? And they admitted that they did. They admitted that they looked into the Steele dossier and they found out that the information came from a guy that worked at the Brookings Institute with very close connections to the Clinton campaign. Mm-hmm. And that the things that he said about having connections in the Kremlin and getting information were lies. And this guy said to the FBI, "Oh, I never thought that anybody was going to take this stuff seriously. It was just talk amongst a bunch of guys that were drinking." He also said that he got a bunch of information from a guy named Chuck something or other. The guy was in Northern Virginia. And the guy had formerly been the head of some faction of the Clinton campaign in either Virginia or North Carolina. So the FBI get this Steele dossier. They look into it, and they find out that this is a guy from the Brookings Institute who worked with Fiona Hill. The guy had an history of alcohol problems. He had been arrested for public intoxication and all kinds of things. And he told them this was drunken talk. And I got it from this guy connected to the Clinton campaign. So they get the Steele dossier, talk to the guy who says, I gave the stuff to Steele, but I never thought he would use it for anything like this. Drunken talk, whatever. And, I got it from the Clinton campaign. Okay, so now they vetted it and it is totally discredited. And they went forward and they lied to a FISA court repeatedly and said, "Oh yeah, the Steele dossier is 100%. This is bulletproof, man, and we need this. So use this in court, and we can." People can have been prosecuted for much less, Ray.
Yeah,
and I know you're familiar with all of that from the Durham report.
Yeah, another thing about the Durham report, he was prohibited from looking into the killing of Seth Rich. Okay, that came out in some of the court documents. That when Durham and the other FBI IG, the Inspector General, looked into this, the word was, "Do not look into the killing of Seth Rich." We know about that. That's all. So it's that corrupt. Now, we haven't mentioned one corruption. When you say laptop, the first thing I think of is Hunter Biden. But Seth Rich's laptop is equally or even more important. But on the Hunter Biden business, suffice it to say that Tony Blinken, with the first letter B in his. He's even on top of C for Clinton on the to-do list for Joe Biden to pardon. Here's why. Well, disregard the fact that Blinken was as much responsible for the war against Iraq as anybody else. He made sure that Scott Ritter did get in the door to testify before the Senate the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where Joe Biden was chair. He did all these things, okay? But more recently, what has he done? Well, go back 4 years, right before, or more than 4 years, right before the 2020 election. Hunter's laptop. Disregard all the lewd and all the nudity and all the drugs and stuff. There was in that laptop stuff showing that not only Hunter, but Daddy was on the take. It's clear that the information was there. And some of it had leaked. The New York Post had posted a story on it until it was taken off YouTube and X and everything else. And sort of said, don't say anything more until after the election, which they had to do because that's what happened, right? So what happened? They were worried stiff. So Tony Blinken said, now what are we going to do? The last debate is coming up between Trump and Biden. Oh, I know what we could do. We gotta discredit that Hunter's laptop. Now, the FBI's had it for almost a year, but let's say, yeah. So he calls Mikey Morell, who was the acting director of the CIA for a while, and he says, "Hey, Mikey, do me a favor. Do you think you could get 10 former intelligence directors or very high officials to say that, for example, that Hunter Biden's laptop is a Russian intelligence disinformation operation?" Mikey Morell: "No problem. I'd get more than 10. 10 will be enough." "Okay, when do you need it?" "Well, the last debate's coming up in 10 days, so as soon as possible." Okay. Mikey Morell hangs up the phone, gets his minions together, comes up with 50 former intelligence directors or sub-directors or whatever, okay? Calls up Tony Blinken, says, "I get 50. I'm going to add my own because I was acting director of CIA, so I will get 51 now," okay? And they've just issued a statement saying that Hunter Biden's laptop bears all the earmarks of Russian intelligence misinformation operation, okay? So you're in like Flynn. Oh, wow. The next debate, several days later, Joe Biden is asked by Donald Trump, still not used to the treachery that goes on in Washington. He says, Trump says, "Now, Mr. Biden, what about that laptop that shows that you would take on the take from not only the Ukrainians, but from the Chinese and all that? What about that?" And Joe Biden says, "Mr. Trump, haven't you read that bears all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation? Don't you know that? 51 former intelligence directors from the U.S. intelligence community have attested to that. Have you not seen that memorandum? Come on!" Perfect squelch. Trump didn't know what to do. He was very ill-prepared for this kind of thing, all right? Who won? Well, I'm not saying that this lost the thing for Trump, but it sure as hell didn't help, okay? It could have been very damaging to Biden. What's my point? Did I say before that the FBI had it for almost a year? Yeah, I think I did say that. Why am I saying that again? Well, because did one of these 51 former intelligence directors think to check with the FBI and say, "Hey, old friends, is this true? Do you have something that bears all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation?" And then the FBI would say, No, or they have to lie. So the whole system is corrupt. I think that not one of those 51 went and asked the FBI, whom they knew had the laptop. And so Biden was able to dust this one off. Why do we get into all this? Because it was Blinken. It was Blinken. They called in his old chips from his old friend Mikey Burrell, And, you know, Garland, this is sort of painful for me because I served with several of those high level deputy directors and directors and so forth. And one in particular I know is a really straight guy who would just tell it like it is no matter what and take the consequences, okay? But on this one he caved. And I asked him, hey, what gives here? He says, well, I'm just so intent on making sure that Trump doesn't win again. My God, I just had to do everything I could. So here's this quintessential honest analyst of Russia and Middle East affairs who had come down with Trump derangement syndrome, pure and simple. And that's really sad because he, if anyone, knew better. He, if anyone, should have checked with the FBI. He, if anyone, should have been able to overcome this visceral hatred for Trump. And, sort of say, well, at least don't put my name on that damn thing, okay? And he was one of the first names on the list. So that pains me because that's just a symptom of how bad it was and how bad it is. And suffice it to say that not only Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel have an uphill battle of Sisyphean proportions, but that so does Donald Trump. And he is the president coming on January 20th. I'm an American, and I wish him well in terms of accomplishing the good things that he says he wants to do, and those have to do with Ukraine. I'd be hard-pressed to think of other good things right now, but that's a big good thing. And so let's try to keep open minds and not be affected by Trump derangement syndrome, at least not just now. Let's give the guy a break.
And let's just, I keep using this term, the race to January 20th. I argue that this particular show has, and this is just, we didn't go down the rabbit hole. We didn't even look down the rabbit hole. We just drove into the vicinity of the rabbit hole as to where this thing could go should there be legitimate investigations. That being said, there are people that are highly motivated to make sure that those investigations don't happen by whatever means that they would need to use. So we are in a very dangerous time. Every time I click on media again, today, when I saw two things. One, and you might not even seen this, there's something now saying Israel's preparing to strike Iranian nuclear sites. There's something out there that says the U.S. have given Maduro a deadline. And the deadline just happens to be January 10th to step down or things are going to get bad, right? When I look at what happened in South Korea the other day, and I see that the Biden and the neocons, they're a cornered beast. They're a desperate monster. And from Iran, Iran's not planning on striking nuclear sites. The U.S. is planning on, Israel, come on, Israel they got to have everything they need. Where do they get the bombs, everything from? So obviously the neocons are saying maybe it's the time to attack Iran before Trump gets in. Or maybe it's the time to do something else in Ukraine. Oh, what about South Korea? Well, they're right there in North Korea. We could always start a war with North Korea. What about, South America. We left South America out. We got to attack, use Guyana to attack Venezuela. We're at a point where if we can figure out the level of liability that these people have, I think they know far better than us. And we just got to cross our fingers for a very bumpy ride, Ray, between now and then. And I think that the conversation we had now, these people aren't scared of a lot of things, but they're scared of themselves and being held accountable for the things that they've done, Ray.
Garland, it's a good note to end on. It's a scary time. These people are desperate. They couldn't prevent Trump from winning. They couldn't prevent him from appointing these very dangerous for them nominees. And so there's lots of incentive in these last 6 weeks to do strange and terrible things, not least of which could be a wider war. Where? In the Middle East, Ukraine. Now, are there any good aspects to all this? Any good things you can look at? Well, I go back to there was an old medieval abbess, I think it was Julian of Norwich, and she said, all will be well, all manner of things will be well. That's not an intelligence judgment, that's a faith judgment. But I think that with a demonstrably patient, perspicacious person in Russia named Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and his new riding high with a game-changing weapon called the Oreshnik, not nuclear, but you put a bunch of them together, you've got the equivalent of a nuclear strike. He doesn't have to do anything except advertise that he has this weapon. My guess is he'll advertise it again in a couple of days because the West has done exactly what he told them not to do. That is, strike more deeply into Russia than they have before. So what I'm saying here is that, in my view, Putin will wait his time to see what the prospects are for Trump, who has already dissed Zelensky in a very ostentatious way. And so what do we need to be immediately afraid of, like in the next 6 weeks? A false flag operation. The Israelis are hitting at chemical weapons sites in Syria, right? There aren't any there, okay? And this throws me back to other false flag attacks blamed on Bashar al-Assad, but really fomented by the moderate rebels that we and others encouraged. So what are the prospects of this kind of thing being used in a way to justify wider war? And God help us, did this South Korean guy decide to do martial law all by himself? Or did he call up his patrons, Tony Blinken, and say, well, you think this would be a good idea? And got to go ahead. As sort of a test platform to see what Tony Blinken might urge on President Biden if push comes to shove. Hey, so I wouldn't put anything past these guys. These guys are, in my view, far more dangerous over the next 6 weeks than Trump will be after the 20th of January. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Those who are praying types, let's try to figure out a way to make this not happen. And we'll all live another 4 years, and hopefully Trump can be better than a lot of people expect him to be. One can hope. Hope springs eternal, someone once said.
Everyone can go to raymcgovern.com. That's raymcgovern.com. That's Ray's website, and all of his work, all of his interviews and his writings, etc., are there. So go to raymcgovern.com and keep up with it regularly, because all of his interviews, etc., are available there. Also follow Ray on X, and are you on any other platforms, Ray?
I'm on Facebook. Yeah.
Okay, but X is the one you say you're the most, would you say?
Yeah, X is at Ray Mcgovern. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sounds good. So everybody follow Ray, and of course follow me on both YouTube and Rumble, of course, and Rockfin also. You never know what could happen. But I'm on Rumble and Rockfin, and those are both great platforms. And additionally, they're backups in case the unthinkable thinking that happens on YouTube. So follow me there. Share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We're out.
Thank you,
Ray, Ray, before you go.